Okay, welcome to the 2021 Business for Peace Spotlight Series, Rethinking Systems of Decent Work. My name is Knut Andersen, and I'm the Global Lead of Livelihood and Food Security in Norwegian Refugee Council. I'm the former postman that wanted to use my skills and passion for more than just making people happy with some love letters, or maybe not so happy with another bill in their mailbox. So I've been in the humanitarian and development sector for the last 14 years. I started with MSF, then I worked with Development Fund of Norway, and now I'm working with Norwegian Refugee Council, NRC. I'm very happy to be your moderator today. So each May, Business for Peace hosts its annual summit, including the Business for Peace Award ceremony. However, due to the coronavirus pandemic, Business for Peace postponed their 2020 summit and decided to host an exciting new digital event series, scaled down to the version of the usual events. In line with their vision to recognize, inspire, and accelerate business-worthy leadership, Business for Peace will continue to host valuable, impactful discussions about current global issues affecting sustainability and ethical business leadership. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the panel discussion on the hidden workforce, with a focus on the Sustainable Development Goal 8, decent work and economic growth. Even before the pandemic, this group of people, be it immigrants, refugees, IDPs, former prisoners, veterans, seniors, caregivers, the disabled and others, struggled to find stable employment with decent working conditions. These groups have been largely neglected in government policies and by business hiring practices, and without a social safety net, they have been pushed deeper into poverty and social exclusion due to the pandemic. In the process of rebuilding, stakeholders need to generate sustainable solutions as to how we can remove barriers that marginalize the hidden workforce and create meaningful space for them in the labor market. Today's panel will focus on policy measures for integrating these groups in the job market, business initiatives to make it easier for these groups to enter into the labor market, removing barriers and stereotypes around these groups, and securing digital identities for refugees. In today's panel, we have 4 excellent participants. The first one is Alexander Betts. Alexander is a professor of forced migration and international affairs, senior fellow in politics at Brasenose College, and associate head of the social science division at the University of Oxford. His research focuses on the politics and the economics of refugees assistance. He is the author and co-author of a number of books that looks into today's topics, including his last release, The Wealth of Refugees, How Displaced People Can Build Economies. Alexander is also seen by millions of people on his TED Talks. We very much look forward to hear his ideas and the reflection in today's panel. Our second panelist is Sarah Beydoun. Sarah is the founder and creative director of Sarah's Bags, a Lebanese fashion house and social enterprise that creates luxury handbags and accessories. Sarah's Bags is employing over 200 women, including female prisoners, ex-prisoners, and underprivileged women in Lebanon. Today, Sarah's Bag is an internationally renowned brand with 10 points of sale in 8 countries, along with regular placements of leading fashion e-commerce sites and features in magazines including Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Elle. In 2016, Sarah received the Business for Peace Award. Today, we hope Sarah can tell us a bit more about the barriers and opportunities she has faced when employing members from the hidden workforce. Our third panelist is Carlos Moreira. Carlos is the founder, chairman, and CEO of OISTE, and a UN expert on cybersecurity and trust models for a number of UN organizations. Carlos is also a founding member and the Secretary General of the OISTE Foundation based in Geneva. Among other things, the foundation worked to promote the use and the adoption of international standards to secure electronic transaction, expand the use of digital certification, and advocacy work to influence policymaking and industrial practices related to digital identity. Today, it will be interesting to hear from Carlos on how digital identities could help the hidden workforce get into the labor market. Our fourth panelist is Mohamed Abdullahi. Mohamed is a former refugee from Dadaab, Kenya. He and his family fled Mogadishu to Dadaab when he was 15 years old. In Dadaab, he had the opportunity to get excellent education and many other privileges that he did not have before. In school, his favorite subject was computer science, and he passed with credentials. Mohamed wanted to continue with computer science studies, but he could not afford the tuition fees. Even though he wanted to work, he could not get a normal job to live outside the camp because of his refugee status, which limits the right to get a job. Therefore, Mohamed turned to the only thing that he could do. He worked online. In late 2019, he decided to return to Somalia to start an e-commerce business where he runs it as today. So I wanted to start, Mohamed, by asking you a question. Maybe if you can share with us a little bit about your background and your journey, and maybe some of the challenges faced as a refugee linked to the issue of getting a job. Mohamed?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, a former refugee, but now I came back to Somalia. But before I left Somalia, I was born here in Mogadishu, where I'm currently. So I was born in Mogadishu, but at the age of 15 years old, that was around 2009, a fighting exploded here in Mogadishu. So the Ethiopian troops were here, and you can imagine Mogadishu back in 2009. It was very chaotic, and my family, I was raised by my grandmother. So my grandmother decided that we should leave Mogadishu and move to one of the IDP camps that was established outside Mogadishu, which was, even though we were in those IDP camps, we could still hear the sound of the bullets at night or whenever the fighting took place. So we couldn't stay there. And my grandmother thought it would be best that we move to Kenya and then get a better education and stay safe in Kenya as long as the war goes on in Somalia, here in Mogadishu, specifically in Mogadishu. And then we took our journey to Kenya. We came to Dadaab. After we came to Dadaab, we were registered as refugees in 2011. That's when we came to Kenya. And then back then there, I didn't have the opportunity to go to school here in Mogadishu because you can imagine there were no schools open, nothing that we could do. We were always afraid that you might be killed if you just go outside, or you might be hit by stray bullets. But when we came to Kenya, everything changed, and now we were in a very stable place where we were around. We were surrounded by many Somali communities, and that's where my journey as a Mohammed started. So as soon as we came there, the first week I was enrolled in a nearby school, which is called Amani Primary School. That's where my journey started, and then I went through that school. I graduated in less than 3 years, primary school there, and I passed very, very well. Even though I did not went to school back then in Somalia, but I did my best because I knew it's not going to be, life will not going to keep us there, and the future is always bright. And then I moved to secondary school. After I joined my secondary school, which is Wabiri Secondary School, I realized that they were just starting a computer class. And then when I was young, my father had a publishing company. So he used to publish magazines and journalists here, and that talked about the reports and all those things here, what was happening. So I thought this is now the future. My father always talked about it very well, and he said, if you have to do anything, I always want you to learn more about computers. And since then, I fancied how computers work. So that was now my chance to learn about computers. So I started there. But unfortunately, my grandmother could not stay with me in Dadaab because the temperature was like very high and she couldn't adapt to the place. So she thought she should go back to Somalia because of health reasons. And I remember I was in secondary school for 2 weeks when she left me, and I was just left all alone there to stay. So I was faced with the decision to go back with my grandmother or to stay in Dadaab alone and finish secondary school, or just go with her. And then I decided to stay in Dadaab to finish my school because I knew if I finished school, I could get better opportunities tomorrow. So what I did,
Mohammed, sorry but in the interest of time, because we don't have so much time, maybe if you can, your story is amazing and really interesting. But if you can just try to tell us about the challenges faced when you wanted to try to get a job after you got your after you finished your education on the science. The computer science, so that we can maybe hear from Alexander, Carlos, and Sarah just after that.
Thank you very much. So after I finished secondary school there, I passed with credentials. And fortunately, I was employed by the same organization that was run by the secondary school. It's called Window International Kenya. And I was able to work there at a sum of $100 per month, but that wasn't enough to cover for my need to further my education. And I thought maybe I should go to Nairobi. I could get better opportunity and then be able to pay for my school fees. And the first challenge I was faced is I couldn't travel to Nairobi unless I was given a travel permission. And that was really very difficult. And when I solicited for a travel letter, they just gave me 3 weeks to stay in Nairobi to finish my things. And after I came to Nairobi, 3 weeks was not enough to finalize everything, to get a job or to apply another travel document. That wasn't really possible. And then when I came to Nairobi, I asked for the Somali community there to give me a job, even though I could get a job, but they were still afraid, because they were afraid if they employ me and I was undocumented worker and didn't have permission to work in Nairobi, their businesses could face problems, and I would also be deported at the same next day to Dadaab refugee camp. And that was really, really very difficult. So what I did is I realized that I couldn't get a chance from Nairobi. Then I came back to Dadaab. And once I came back to Dadaab, fortunately, NRC was now offering online freelancing training. And that really had my interest. So I applied for it. They accepted me. They told me about how I can be able to work online, and they helped me establish my Upwork presence. Upwork, I hope you know Upwork. Upwork is an online platform where freelancers work. So I was accepted into Upwork, and I worked all the way through my way up to now that I am a top-rated freelancer. I do translations for Somali language and data entry. And that really inspired me to start my own company after seeing the success of Jeff Bezos and the e-commerce businesses around the world. And then I decided to go back to Somalia. So I sourced things from the local suppliers, which I upload now to my website, and that's how I now work.
Great, thank you so much, Mohammed. This is really an interesting story to hear, and the journey that you have made. So Alexander, I wanted to, when you hear what Mohammed is telling, of course, this is very much in line with what I have read around your studies and all these kind of things. How is it possible to translate your research into more policy work? How do you see that?
So Abdullahi Mohamed is a great example of the skills, talent, and aspirations that are in refugee communities around the world. There are over 25 million refugees around the world, over 70 million people displaced, and often they're portrayed as a burden, a cost on their host societies. And that's a misguided perception. In practice, displaced people can be massive contributors. They have economic lives, they're producers, consumers, they borrow, they lend, they're entrepreneurs, and we miss out on a huge amount if we miss that as a society. If we just say refugees are a humanitarian challenge, we need to look much more broadly and recognize that displaced people can be part of that hidden workforce. Now, the challenge is that often they're denied the right to work and freedom of movement. They're systematically deprived of the ability to get jobs, or in many cases don't have access to the educational opportunities to have the kind of trajectory that we've just heard. And so it's really important that we try to address that. What I've done in my recent work and the book, The Wealth of Refugees, is to look at 3 countries in East Africa, one of which we've just heard about: Kenya, Ethiopia, and Uganda. And those 3 countries between them host more refugees than the whole of the European Union combined, despite being relatively low-income countries. And they host most of them in refugee camps and settlements in remote rural areas, and to a lesser degree also in cities, particularly their capital cities. Now, what we need to do is ensure that in all of those countries, refugees have the right to work and freedom of movement. Uganda has offered that approach. It's historically allowed refugees to work. And what we've tried to show through our data is that that makes a huge difference, not only to refugees, their mobility, their incomes, their access to sustainable employment, but also even to Uganda as a host community. And Kenya, for instance, has historically not done that. It insists that refugees stay in camps like the Dadaab refugee camps that we've heard about. And so we need to shift away from that model towards more open settlements, urban integration, the financial inclusion of refugees. Most refugees don't have access to banking, ensuring they're not just integrated in the local economies, but also the global economy through, for instance, access to remote work, cloud-based technology, digital identities, and that can really open up opportunities and potentially be transformative. So we've heard very much the lived experience, and also through our research and our data, we've tried to say, this is not just something that needs to change in policy terms, but business has to engage. It's business that can create jobs. It's business that can invest in integrating refugees in urban economies like Nairobi, Kampala, Addis Ababa, where we work, but also in those remote border regions where camps are based, along areas of the borders where business traditionally doesn't invest, doesn't put resources, but where hundreds of thousands of people constantly speak about wanting access to meaningful work, dignified employment opportunities, the investment and capital to build and scale their businesses. And they're entrepreneurs in camps and cities around the world, just waiting for the investment and the seed capital to translate what is very often survival entrepreneurship into something much bigger that can benefit not just them, but their communities and the host communities they're part of.
Great, thanks so much, Alexander. So Carlos, as you heard, Alexander was mentioning digital identity when he was talking. So could you explain to us a little bit what is the digital identity and how could it help to maybe get the refugees more into the workforce?
Thank you very much, and absolutely, I think both the experience demonstrated by Mohamed and later by Alexander on the need to reincorporate this force into the economy is essential. But we are facing a problem, which is the definition itself of a digital identity. If you talk to different stakeholders, a digital identity means different things. If you talk to a government, a digital identity for them will be like a passport or nationality. If you talk to Facebook, will be a consumer or a social media advertising target. If you talk to Amazon, is a consumer, so they can buy products and so on. So digital identity, when I was in the UN and after subsequently in the private sector, it is defined more as a legal identity. This is actually the definition in the SDG 16.9, which is every single human being should have a legal identity. And the legal identity is not a passport, it's not a bank account, it is not a attribute holder, it is actually a human identity. I organized just a few weeks ago a panel with the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, and our proposition was, what about if you insert digital identity as a human right? Because when you enter into the digital world, it's like you burn. I mean, when you burn, you have your birth certificate, and this is, everybody gets one. And it is actually your birth certificate, which is used as a base document to obtain many other certifications during your life. We don't have the equivalent on entering into the internet. So refugees and disadvantaged workforces do have this obstacle because they are not able to identify themselves into the fourth industrial revolution, where the growth is going to be. So because they are not able to identify themselves, they cannot benefit of anything. I give you an example now. We are working with many NGOs on COVID vaccination. There's a lot of refugees and a lot of illegal workers, and they are not able to get a vaccination because before you get in a vaccination, you have to show your QR code, which is generated by your digital identity. So our approach is very factual. I mean, I don't think this is a policy issue. The problem is that digital identity has a consumer value. Facebook makes $2 billion by selling identities, and other social media companies. So we have to convert that digital identity not as a consumer identity, but as a human identity. And every human person, regardless of its condition, geographical location, religion, or attribute, should have access to that digital identity. Now, whether they use it or not, that's their problem, but it's their identity. And whatever happens to that identity should be on their consent and not on the consent of the platform. Because now if you get a digital identity from a platform, that platform owns that identity for you. You are able to use that, but it's the platform the owner. So that platform can one day revoke that identity for you, and then you lose everything, right? If you had been using that identity as a single sign-on to access other services. So my proposition in OISTE, when I was in the UN, I was 20 years in the UN helping building national identities which are not subject to nationalities. I know that this is this 2030 goal by the United Nations, but the problem is that companies are lobbying into this. They want to become the provider of the identity, with obviously for reasons that have nothing to do with this human identity idea. And the only way out here is providing a free identity, and that's what we do. We have teamed with the Clinton Initiative. We provide 1 billion digital identities to 1 billion people. Those identities are provided for free. They are owned by the person, and they have no further relation to the foundation. We also work with NGOs. We help them to build digital identity ecosystem. We work with schools. We work with universities for getting students to have a digital identity. And the good news is that once you have a digital identity that is yours, then you have a total new ecosystem of possibilities that opens to you, because you are immediately, you have a non-reputable way of defining who you are, and that non-reputable way cannot be renegated, cannot be taken from you just because a platform will not accept. The good news is that there is an international standard. ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, has a very old standard, which is X509 standards that all telcos in the world are using. And this is actually the basis standard to create a digital identity. So my big advice always there is that let's define first what a digital identity is. Let's develop legislation at national level and international level. Then a digital identity should be owned by the person and not by the platform or the technology provider. And all the data that this digital identity or service on this digital identity will be attached to it, it should be on the consent of the person. Digital consent has a huge value. A refugee, only by providing consent to access the data, could be financed into crypto wallets. Then you can add to the digital identity into your mobile phone, which is actually the new way of sending money, right? So having an identity is the beginning to be neutral, to be independent, and to be free, to basically benefit from the fourth industrial revolution and all the advantages that this revolution is bringing.
Thanks a lot, Carlos. At least I learned quite a lot on that one. I think I find it's very, very interesting, and human identity, I think it's a great word. Sarah, as you could hear from both the challenges that Mohammed faced, but also what Alexander was talking a little bit about, the business needs to be involved. You as a business leader, someone who has established your own business, including some people from the hidden workforce, how would you look at this? What is your advice for more businesses to do this? You're on mute.
There we go. We're good. She's good. Okay.
No, I think she's muted.
Yeah. No, she's not.
I'm not muted.
Now
Hi.
You are here. Hi, Sarah.
Okay. So I want to tell you, I started a business employing women in prison, and I would train them on all the handwork, and this handwork will later on become handbags. It started as a social program to later on develop and become like a real brand. And with developing this brand, I kept my mission of employing these women. And instead of employing women only in the prison, I went out to employ other women. These women, once they're out of the prison, and I encouraged them to employ other women in their premises, around them, in their families, and to create a positive ripple effect on the community they are in. So instead of being stigmatized as being in prison, they're looked upon as an added value to their community. They're providing work to the village and so on. And I think more businesses should be doing this. As Alexander said, all these hidden, like this hidden force is a force that could be used as a positive advantage. And in my own experience, I remember the first time I did an exhibition and I exhibited 120 bags and they all sold. The next day I was in the national news because I worked with women in prison. And this was the thing that really encouraged me and pushed me also to continue my mission and to expand, having this in mind, keeping the core, the core of my business, the mission as a core of my business. And I think more companies are doing this, and other big companies who are unable to do it are actually referring to companies that does social work. So from this year, for example, I did a collaboration with MasterCard because they wanted to work with companies that empower women. I did the collaboration with Lancôme because also they wanted to work with a company that helps women. And I did this with Aspesi, which is an Italian brand. So I think more and more brands are realizing that governments are not doing enough work, and that they as brands should put their feet down and do something. And consumers also are demanding that brands have a mission, that brands be not only profitable, but also profitable and transparent in the way they make the profit, and also engage other people and have a purpose in what they do. So I think the whole world is gearing toward this, and I think we should catch the wave and work with underprivileged people and really give them another chance. Because out of my own experience, like, I'm not just a brand that does handbags. I wake up every day not because I do handbags. I wake up every day because I feel that I can do a change in somebody's life. And I think people should look at their businesses and try to do something quite similar to this.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. That's really, really inspiring. We should have you on loudspeakers all over the world to so more people could hear that. But with the limitations that we have, Alexander, you talked about. Of course, I also have read a lot of reports on the policy limitations that are in so many countries. Uganda is the positive side. If you go to Bangladesh, for example, it's really on the other side of the coin. So how can we collectively try to push for a better chance for the people we are talking about? You mentioned yourself, like now we are there are more than 80 million displaced people in the world, in addition to all the others that are encompassed in the hidden workforce. What would you say related to that?
So I think there's been a gradual emergence of business engagement with opportunities for refugees, but still too much of that debate is focused on corporate social responsibility, and it's too focused on rich countries like Europe and North America. And there's some great work being done there by multinational corporations. But the real challenge is the regions where there are low and middle income countries that host 85% of the world's refugees. And business is often reluctant to invest in those countries. And as you just said, many of those countries don't even formally give refugees the legal right to work. So that makes it very hard for business to know how to engage. But there are opportunities, and there are opportunities, I think, for business to influence even the policy and the legislation. Because once we have businesses speaking out to government saying, we want to employ both refugees and members of the host community, they can start to listen. So let me give you an example. Ethiopia didn't allow refugees the right to work. It had a very restrictive regulatory framework, at least until it passed new legislation in early 2019. But it had a very positive experience of the IKEA Foundation, the philanthropic arm of the furniture company, investing over $100 million in 5 refugee camps in the south of the country, the Doloado camps, home to well over 100,000 Somali refugees. They were created just over a decade ago in a very arid, remote area. The IKEA Foundation invested in infrastructure around irrigation. the creation of markets, and it did so in a way that was even-handed, that create opportunities for refugees and host country citizens, the Ethiopian nationals in that area. And that, I think, has played a role not only in creating sustainable livelihoods opportunities for both communities, the refugees and Ethiopian citizens, but changing the very attitude of the government. So the government has now said to the outside world, we're going to change our legislation. We want businesses to invest in our national development strategy, in our industrialization strategy. And so I think that illustrates that business, in its broadest sense, whether it's core business activity, more CSR-based or philanthropic activity, can make a difference both to refugees and host communities, and in doing so, gradually move the needle of how governments even think about the right to work for those populations. It's also important to know, though, that even when there are regulatory barriers, it doesn't mean the door is closed to business activity. So in Kenya, which obviously is home to the Dadaab camps that are very restrictive, very difficult environment, in the area that hosts the Kakuma camps in the northwest of the country, the Turkana County region, despite the central government saying refugees must stay in camps, the local governor there, Josphat Nanok, took a different policy. He said, okay, Turkana County has two resources, oil and refugees. This is our region's opportunity to develop. And so has gradually started to invite business leaders to go to the region and think about ways in which they can invest. So business shouldn't be put off. Business should be part of the transformation, even in regulation and policy.
Yeah, thanks, Alexander. I have actually been to the Doloado area myself when I worked and lived in Ethiopia, and it's quite an inspiring place to be because it's moving in the right direction. Sarah, you being in Lebanon with some quite strict rules on, especially on what Syrian refugees can and cannot do, how do you see, or do you discuss with other companies that you are collaborating with on what are the opportunities for of course you are working with the prisoners and previous prisoners, but for example for refugees, have you any discussions at the local or the national level on what is potential, what is possible to do there?
Actually, we have a very, very big refugee problem in Lebanon, and it's not only the Palestinian refugees that we hosted years ago. Now we have all the Syrian refugees that became almost the same number as the locals, and it's very hard being here, and it's very hard because also the refugees, in a way, sometimes they would take the work of the locals and create some create some hatred in between. So really, the government has to step up and take some measures. But really, my country is not a country that you should take an example of. So we're completely messed up on this level.
Yeah, no, that's there are some challenges on that, definitely.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarah. I was wondering, Carlos, based on what you have heard and of course your long experience in UN and in other organizations, how can we together work towards more inclusion of this hidden workforce, both what you have been talking about, the legal or human identity, the policy issues, the financial, the investment needs in businesses? Have you made any reflections around that one?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. My first recommendation will be to stop the narrative or refugee, digital divide, people and they are displaced. This is an analog definition that does not correspond anymore to a post-COVID world. Everybody now is a displaced worker. My entire organization is displaced. I don't even know where my staffs are anymore. So what about if my staffs are actually people in a refugee camp? Then they will be working for me. This is the future. The future is a future where the economy is getting molecularized. The location of a person is irrelevant anymore. I mean, who cares where the person is, provided that they have a good connection of internet and a camera and skills. And actually, the digital economy sees these refugees and displaced people as the next big revolution in the workforce. because the workforce is actually muting as well. We are leaving the job concept to the task concept. So I'm not going to be having anymore an employer that is going to pay me a salary, but I will be able to sell my task to thousands of people around the world from my refugee camp, and I'm going to make enough money. So one day I leave the refugee camp. So I think what we need to design is an exit strategy rather than continuously, you know, I work in IOM. I have been in many refugee camps around the world, and we are always repeating the same story generation after generation, but we are still keeping them there. We are not able to develop a business model that will allow them to leave the country and find their destiny. I was myself, I was not a refugee, but I was a migrant in Spain when Spain was very poor, and I came to Switzerland, and I, in this country, developed my life and my company. So if you empower people and you unleash their potential, there's absolutely no way anymore than in 10 years time or 50 years time, we're going to keep on this narrative of digital divide, refugee, misplacement. We have to bring the world to the, Alexander mentioned about those 25 million. I see them as a 25 million potential digital workers, then they are going to slowly enter into the economy. This actually, you know, when you divide, for instance, I'll give you an idea of economics. If you divide the market cap of a company, which is a very famous social network, without mentioning the name, which is reaching $1 trillion, and they make $1 trillion market cap on 2 billion people, each person is $500 per year contribution to the valuation of that company. So, and these people are all over the world, including refugee camps. They're accessing that social media company, and they are counting on that valuation, right? So if you bring the workforce that represents the refugees, the camps, the misplacements, the people, the illegal workers, and they cannot find a permit, but you don't need a permit to access the internet and sell your services, right? You can do that, and you can get paid with cryptocurrencies, so you don't even need to have a bank account anymore. So that's the future, right? But we need to change the narrative ourselves as well, because otherwise we are repeating the same old business model, which failed totally because people are still in refugee camps and people are still unable to incorporate themselves into the economy. And now, due to the COVID situation, where everybody's going to have to rethink themselves, it's a total digital transformation going on around the world, new thinking, new technologies, only countries and people that they are able to grasp this digital transformation are going to be there for the next cycle of growth. And this is a big opportunity to refugees of the world, right? They are, and I will encourage them to get educated, at least enough to sell their services online, to get a digital identity so they can get paid and they can identify themselves, to download a crypto wallet so they can get paid with cryptocurrencies, and then compete against other people in very expensive cities, which obviously their salary is going to be much higher. That's the opportunity for them. And this is the time. It is now.
Thanks a lot, Carlos. I think this is a really good point that you're highlighting there, and I think it speaks directly to you, Mohammed, because this is a bit like what you have been doing. You got your basic education, you got your computer science education, and you have actually started your own company. So how do you respond to what you have heard from the three other panelists here, and maybe especially what Carlos was just talking about right now, the opportunities for refugees to, now we have the opportunity, you need a computer or you need an internet connection, and then you're there.
Definitely. What Carlos has said is very important. Now, even you just need a very stable internet and a computer and a skill that you can send online. So I did that when since 2018 up to now, I believe I made over $7,000, and that's not even no way close to what I could have done if I was back there in the Dab refugee camp, so which I was getting paid only $100 for my services. And now I have very, very many friends back there in the Dab right now who are working as freelancers. They work with companies in the US. They are getting paid $30 per hour. Even some of them are getting paid over $1,000 per month, which is like too much for them there. So that's definitely the future. The only thing we need right now is to develop our skills. Maybe get a course on Skillshare or Udemy course, and that's all it takes you to be able to get money much better than what you could have gotten in working locally or there.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. Thanks, Mohammed. Of course, you are also an example that you need to seize the opportunity when you have it. It's not enough just to have the access to internet and to have the laptop. You also need to have some inner passion, and you need to want this by yourself. We will continue with some more questions to you, but Sarah, there is a specific question from someone that was listening in, asking about how were your employers compensated for their labor while in prison?
Yes, we created a system that I get into the prison throughout an NGO, and all the work I provide to the girls, they're paid, but through this NGO. So we created a system to pay them, and they're paid per piece, whether I can sell the piece or not. And they're paid enough to spend on their daily use or to send money to their kids. I have even workers in the prison who gathered the money and were able to appeal their cases with lawyers. So no, they're paid enough for the program to still be running till now. It's been 20 years now.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. Alexander, when you hear from Carlos, who's talking about we need to change the narrative, we need to have a business model, and then we have heard and seen Mohammed in the way that he has progressed. How do you see that we can move on that going forward?
I think we're at a very interesting point. Carlos mentions the opportunities of the digital transformation, and I think they're very real. They mean that no matter where you are in the world, you can engage with the global economy. Geography doesn't matter as much as it has done and shouldn't be as much of a constraint on people's opportunities. But I think what we also need to do alongside that is to create equality of access and opportunity to have meaningful work and to engage. And so a premise of that has to be that people have access to education, vocational training, all of the skills they need to participate in the digital economy and avoid exploitation. So I think the potential is there, but we need to lower the barriers to entry, ensure opportunities to access, and ensure that there are ways in which work and the ability to compete in that global economy become meaningful and dignified. So I'm excited by it, but I also, when we translate that to refugee camps, see that we need to get the quality of the broadband available. We need international organizations to adapt to that reality. We need NGOs to provide the opportunities that facilitate that access. And that relies upon our humanitarian system, for instance, being more attuned to the global economy, more attuned to the role that business can play, less focused on just providing food, clothing, shelter, although those are obviously crucial, and more focused on how we develop the spaces where refugees are as investable, as spaces that empower people through education, training, and get them up to a level where they can compete in the way Carlos describes. So my basic reaction is I'm excited by that moment of opportunity, but also see that to make it meaningful, to make it dignified, we've got to get those communities and those populations able to participate on closer to a level playing field.
Yeah, thanks, Alexander. I'll just, in my organization, NRC, we are currently working on our new strategy, and we are discussing should access to internet be almost as important as you mentioned to food and water and all the other basic services, because if we can do that, we might be able to create a lot more opportunities for many, many more people than we are currently doing today. So it is already ongoing discussion, at least in my organization, and I'm sure in also other humanitarian organizations. So it's a really relevant question, and how we will look at that going forward. Because if we continue with the same way of thinking and working, we will not really move so much forward. Ladies and gentlemen, we have about 10 minutes left. So I was just wondering if there are some last reflections from each of you. So let's say that we give each of you 2-3 minutes to have some last reflection, and then I will try to wrap it up by the end of the session. So who wants to start? Should we give the lady the benefit? Yes, Sarah, start with you.
No, I just want my last word to be that it's so important to have a human-centric company, and the human aspect should be at the core of the strategy of any company. This human centricity would actually employ underprivileged people or have a cause that the whole company supports. And I think that the hidden force, they should not be considered as burdens. They should be considered as a competitive advantage. And I hope this would be possible.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. We have another question, and I don't know exactly who should answer that, but how does refugees and immigrants integrate their host communities through sharing of skills and expertise? I think it's relevant for more of you. So, Sarah, you were talking very shortly, so if you have something to think about that, or if you want that to go to some of the other.
No, definitely, they should. There's two ways. First of all, if the government allows it and facilitates it, it becomes possible. And also the host community should also be open-minded and not take advantage, but benefit from the skills of this labor that's mostly cheap and very eager to prove themselves and eager to achieve and willing to learn and willing to survive. So I think the communities it depends really on the communities that are hosting the refugees.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Alexander, some reflections in general, and then maybe if you can also around the questions that we just had.
I mean, let me perhaps make my general reflection that I think we need to focus on refugees and host communities together. One of the things I often say is a good refugee policy is also a good host community policy. In order to bring opportunities for work, access to public services like health and education to refugees, it has to be legitimate amongst citizens in the host community. And so that involves enabling them to share in the benefits and perceive that they share in the benefits. And I think one of the big shifts over recent years in development-based approaches to refugee and displaced populations has also been to ensure that host communities are part of that. And what we've seen in our research, for instance, is that when citizens perceive that the presence of nearby refugees contribute to the economy, whether as consumers, employees, entrepreneurs, the perception of refugees is much better and social cohesion is a strong outcome. So social cohesion, we find, is correlated with the host community's perception of the economic contributions of refugees. So it is part of that narrative change. And I think that what that means from a business perspective or from a humanitarian perspective is that we need to not look at refugees and the host communities in silos. We need to join them up, and it has impacts for how we even think about, for instance, refugee camps. We need to move beyond encampment and think more about integrated settlements for both refugees and host communities in rural areas. And when it comes to cities, to create opportunities for integration of refugees in existing economic structures that host communities participate in. So I think my central message is, whether we're businesses, whether we're governmental or non-governmental policymakers, let's focus even-handedly on both communities and encourage employment opportunities, educational opportunities, and integration. Those, in the evidence that we've encountered, lead to better social cohesion, better integration opportunities, and greater scope to build the economies of those border regions or cities for everybody's benefit.
Right, thanks so much, Alexander. Carlos, yes, Carlos, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so my conclusions is, as I started when I started this discussion, is that we should stop talking about refugee and migrants. Those are analog concepts. They are not digital concepts. There is no such a thing as a digital refugee or a digital immigrant. Actually, if you look in who has made Silicon Valley companies, all of them, they are migrants, right? Then they went and now they are running CEOs of big corporations. So in the digital world, we don't have that concept of refugee anymore. Maybe this is how you started. You were one day refugee and then you get into a camp, but this is not the end. This is actually the beginning. these young people, which are ages are between 20 and 35, actually, they are what we call digital natives. So they know exactly their possibility on the digital economy. They know how to use mobile phones in an amazing way. They know social media. They know everything. And what they just need, as you say, Knut, is somebody to give them the skills locally. At the same time, they get the water and they get the food, so they can increase their skill. And this is not anymore a refugee problem. This is a new fourth industrial revolution incorporation of the task force problem. And the good news is that private sector is willing to invest. I will invest in a refugee camp if I can recruit 20, 30, 100 people there. All companies will be willing to invest. But you need to have this mindset to stop calling them refugees, because that's what they were and that's it. But when they enter into the digital economy, they are not refugees anymore. And actually having this stamp of refugee in the digital economy will be a handicap for them, because they will have to over-justify themselves in the same way that if you're a migrant and you enter into a country, you have to justify yourself twice that you are good. One, because you're a migrant, and then because you are good, right? So let's define a more aggressive incorporation policy, which is to give the migrants and the refugees the possibility to act as a digital citizens of the world, with the tools that will allow them to perform their skills, monetize their skills, and leave the camp as soon as possible, because they will not need to be there anymore.
Thanks a lot, Carlos. No one are digital refugees. I really like that statement. Mohammed, you started, and you are allowed to be the last one to do some short reflections here.
Thank you very much. So for me, I would have only suggested that people should be allowed to travel, to go to the cities, to explore. People with the skills, like, you know, to be given a work permit. So if they are able to work, they can provide better for their families. They can contribute to the economy. They can study. So they can do a lot of stuff. So that's the only thing I would suggest is, if it's possible for countries to accept refugees to travel to main cities, to work there, that would be the best thing they can do for them.
Thanks, Mohammed. That was a very clear pledge on the end for your sake. I think it's really interesting, and what I'm taking from the discussion is that we have a lot of strong forces in this room and in general. But the challenge, the way that I see it, and also working in the humanitarian and in development sector for many years, is that it's somewhat a bit difficult to join the forces strong enough to create the change. I think, Alexander, you have written about it, you have mentioned it here. We kind of have the tools, and also Carlos, when you're talking about the digital transformation and the things that are coming. The opportunities are here, but are we ready to take it? And when I say we, I don't mean us in this room, because I think we more or less agree on what should be the opportunities. And Sarah's talking about the businesses and the importance of inclusion and all that. But how do we actually do this together? Because we can meet in these kind of rooms, or we can meet in some conferences here and there, but we need to get the governments on board. We need to get the world society on board. We need to change the narrative a little bit on how we should do this going forward. And I think that is, at least the way I see it, it's one of the challenges in my sector, because we are talking about the humanitarian sector as it is different from the development sector or the business sector or whatever, but we are a part of the whole picture. And I think that is one of the challenges. And of course, we are competing on the same funds and the resources, and everybody's saying that resources are limited. But I think when we see how COVID has really changed the world in almost no time, these are also some we could change for the better for when other things, if we put our resources together. So these are also some of the things that I think is really interesting. And now here in the Western world, we are talking about soon COVID is over, everybody's vaccinated. But if we look at the world, like 3% or something of the world population is vaccinated as of now. So it's far from over, and it's something that affects all of us. And it has made us work in a different way than we have done before. Maybe that will lead to an opportunity for the people we are talking about now, especially refugees and those that are marginalized, that can work in a different way. So let's hope that we can continue to work on this, to push forward, and to make sure that together we can try to find better and lasting solutions. So I would like to thank all of you for the very good inputs into this discussion. Of course, it's too short as always, but keep up the good work. Thank you, Mohammed, for joining us from Bangladesh. A really inspiring story from Sarah and your business and the way that you're including the marginalized women there. And for Alexander and the books and your inspiring talks, and Carlos for teaching me more on digital identities and inclusion. That was really useful. So thanks a lot, everybody, and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.